Welcome back, Metroid friends. We're almost there, and we finally received a proper look at Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Prime 4 has been my most anticipated game for years now, but I thought most of the previous trailers and marketing materials were sort of poorly handled in terms of editing, presentation, and just projecting confidence about the finished product. I'm glad to say that's all mostly been resolved now. This new snapshot feels like the essential and reassuring preview we've all been waiting for. Because Prime 4 is almost here, instead of the usual frame-by-frame deep dive, I want to focus on some key points, given the scope of the new material that's been revealed. One interesting aspect of the preview that immediately caught my attention, and which I haven't seen that widely discussed, is the almost complete absence of Sylux and Metroid enemies or imagery. Previous trailers placed significant emphasis on Sylux, and featured a new breed of Metroids capable of controlling and fusing with other life forms. In this latest trailer, though, Sylux is mentioned by name only once and receives hardly any screen time in the 7-minute video, and the new Metroids appear even less. The only notable moment is a brief clip of Sylux emerging from a container, clutching his head in apparent pain. This preview made me question just how significant a threat Sylux really is in the game. Could he be a secondary antagonist overshadowed by an even greater force? It seems possible that both he and Samus will end up pursuing, or at least be threatened by, a more powerful entity, each for their own reasons. From a story perspective, the trailer focuses primarily on the destruction of the Lemorne civilization, which apparently occurred long before Samus or Sylux arrived. My guess is that some greater evil wiped out the Lemorne, and Sylux may be seeking this power, perhaps through the artifact that led them to Vuros. I appreciate how the trailer reveals much about the world while keeping the main plot mysterious, leaving plenty of hidden story to uncover. Beyond the story, the overall quality of the visuals, music, aesthetics, and scope of this latest preview genuinely impressed me. I think Prime 4 looks much better, or at least much more interesting than it has in the past, for several reasons. Most notably, Nintendo selected much more dynamic or interesting clips to present this time around. Whether that's rooms with lighting highlights and energy fields like this Volt Forge, moody ice chambers and laboratories, grand halls lined with dotted lights, interesting and moody morph ball half-pipes, or these cool morph ball tunnels, or larger rooms that make use of the viola, it's all looking great this time around. Vast outdoor areas also present well. This moody, frozen tundra shot with a dramatic moon in the sky is probably my favorite, though we also get a better look at this molten facility. And the open jungle views are looking nice as well. I love the particle effects on the giant tree. The game even showed off a few massive bosses, including one on the viola, another increase in scale for the game over the previous smaller enemies we've seen. In general, this trailer also showcases generally better texture work and surface detail than we've seen in the past. Perhaps either last-minute polish for Switch 2, or just better selections of clips or from a later build. Prime 4 also appears to feature stunning cinematics throughout, more extensive than I previously assumed. These are possibly the best-looking cinematics I've seen on a major Nintendo game. Samus's suit always looks amazing in these scenes, and it's clear now that the game does have extensive story cutscenes for a Metroid game. I personally don't mind more story in Metroid games, as long as, well, we'll come back to this. Finally, I do think the desert area is still sort of mediocre looking, but I thought it presented better design-wise in the scope of this wider, more coherent preview. Retro is clearly trying to build a much grander world than we've seen in the past, so I'm sure the intent of this desert area is to increase the distances between biomes and expand the world. The presented structure of the game reminded me a lot of Metroid Prime 2, a central hub area with thematic biomes connected by a central area. The desert basically looks to be a much larger version of those temple grounds, or something like Hyrule Field from Ocarina of Time. It does still bother me that the bike combat animations look super choppy and rough. This is even more confusing now after seeing how polished and beautiful the rest of the animations and visuals are. I don't get this, but at this point, I'm just accepting it. The introduction of the viola also looks more promising after seeing the broader focus on traversal in this game, which to me is one of the most exciting elements. The fact that you can summon the bike anywhere suggests you'll be using this for other gameplay purposes, such as exploring larger chambers and tunnels within biomes, and maybe even puzzle solving, which is all intriguing. In terms of traversal, we also see a new Metroid hookshot of sorts, which also seems to apply to the morph ball segments, and that looks awesome. There's also this super trippy psychic morph ball track of sorts that lets you just roll out into open space. This could get wild on the huge open factory segments. I'm glad to see that understanding the map and intricate level design seems to still be a big focus, and yes, you can jump.
The ability to jump.
Alright, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the addition of the Federation troopers as a core element of the game. When I initially saw this introduced in the overview trailer, I felt cautiously optimistic. I don't mind more story in my Metroid games, as I mentioned, if it's well presented with restraint and doesn't ruin the immersion and isolated exploration. This is one of the many reasons I love Prime 2 Echoes. It has a great story of surprising depth, presented in an unintrusive way. Metroid Dread also handled this well. Now, the character models in the trailer are impressively rendered, possibly the best humans seen in a Nintendo game so far. Faces, animation, and lighting all look pretty natural and detailed. The voice acting also seems fine in the overview trailer, though the dialogue does feel a bit generic. I initially assumed these characters would be limited to sort of side quests, but it seems like they do actually play a much larger role, with different troopers appearing across the different biomes. While I'm slightly concerned this could detract from Metroid's signature isolated exploration, I'm open to the idea if it's handled well. However, all of this rapidly spiraled out of control with the reveal of Miles Mackenzie, an annoying trooper who follows Samus around early in the game and comments on everything imaginable. But let's try to analyze this calmly and not panic. As a side note, I am shocked Nintendo selected the Miles segment in their hands-on marketing preview after all this time. Surely they knew this would cause negative press right before launch, but I digress. Anyway, so far, my assessment is that he appears to be a dated and frustrating inclusion, but probably not game-ruining as some have suggested. The dialogue and commentary is really bad, especially relative to the very high-quality presentation we see throughout the rest of the game. And it's especially odd to me that Retro would add a character like this when the last 3D Metroid game, Other M, was also riddled with terrible dialogue and characters that nearly killed the franchise. However, Miles appears to only be in the game for about a half an hour and then sets up shop as a remote tech of sorts. So if this demo represents most of his screen time, I think things can still turn out fine. Hopefully they could even patch out some of his quips and commentary later after the negative reception, though that's doubtful. However, I'm less concerned with this cringy half-hour slice of Miles and more preoccupied with larger questions about the experience. Are most NPC encounters brief, or do they play some larger role? The other NPCs shown in the trailer seem less irritating than Miles, with better voice acting and character designs. Short, focused interactions, like a quick team-up in the Molten facility to problem-solve and expand context, would be fine, but repeatedly having a chatty companion for extended periods could be devastating to immersion. It seems the Prime sub-series of Metroid insists on moving towards this more cinematic, character-driven approach, so this might be something fans will need to adjust to if the series continues in this format. For now, I'm hoping the other NPCs are less intrusive and that the troopers only play a minor part. Prime 3 had its own share of awkward dialogue, but it didn't ruin the experience, at least for me. Now, the overall impact of the Federation troopers will depend largely on Prime 4's length. If the game is around 15 hours and NPCs each occupy an hour, their presence would be extensive and excessive. But if the game is closer to 25 to 30 hours for the core experience, and NPCs only take up 20 to 30 minutes per biome, that role would be much less significant, potentially even a positive addition outside of Miles if they can help enrich the story and context of each area. One of my main concerns with the increased focus on cutscenes and characters is how Samus is presented. In the footage shown, her complete silence feels a little odd given the emphasis on dialogue and cinematic moments. While a silent protagonist works in minimal presentation settings, with such extensive dialogue and cinematics here, it makes Samus look overly robotic. I would prefer if she spoke extremely occasionally, just 1 or 2 lines per extended cinematic, just to show she's engaged and a human. If paired with less slapstick, more meaningful NPCs, this approach could have worked well. Personally, I do expect Samus will speak at some point, even if it's just one or two impactful lines, given that she has spoken in multiple Metroid games previously, likely during a key moment or if she removes her helmet. For example, I think someone like Jennifer Hale, who voiced the Forgotten Prime 1 alternate intro, could do a good job of adding a bit of life or personality to Samus through extremely minimal speech. So despite the Miles fiasco, I would say my hype for this game is the highest it's been since the initial reveal trailer that confirmed the game is real and made of the same DNA. This preview offered a much more polished, reassuring, and confident look at what should be a big holiday game for Switch 2 and Metroid fans. One other point to wrap up is it's notable that the Switch 1 version was completely absent again from the trailer footage. While this makes sense for a Switch 2 focused presentation, I was surprised there wasn't even a brief montage when the Switch 1 version is mentioned to reassure fans the original platform runs fine. It's strange to think that we might not see any Switch 1 footage before release, considering that was the game's initial target, and the vast majority of Nintendo's audience is still on Switch 1. But what did you think of this preview? There's a lot to discuss here, so leave a comment, please consider subscribing, and we'll get through these final days together.